Have you ever heard that children pick up languages so quickly? Well, this might not actually be the case. In this video, we're going to discuss some of the research. Over time, many linguistic scholars have suggested this critical period. That means that there's this age, and after a certain age, you will not be able to achieve a native-like ability in a foreign language. However, upon further review of some of these studies, we found that this might not actually be the case. So what is the perfect age to learn a foreign language? Let's look at some of the research. In the description below, I've linked some of the papers I refer to in this video. So if you want to read them on your own time, be my guest. But we're going to discuss a lot of the concepts in those papers, especially the Marinova-Todd et al. Paper that's linked in the description. In the Marinova-Todd et al. Paper, we are introduced to three sort of misconceptions and three areas where studies in the past may not have correctly identified the age at which we should learn a language. The first fallacy they discuss is the misinterpretation fallacy, where we say that children learn quicker than adults. But upon further review of other studies, like Rivera, that shows that adults actually initially, so at the beginning, adults learn quicker than children, even for phonological acquisition, so phonetics and speaking. We are also introduced to Genesee's work on French immersion students in Canada. And I myself took French immersion in Canada. French immersion is when you basically do half of your courses in French and half of your courses in English. So you're not just taking a French class, you're doing history in French, you're doing geography in French, you may even be doing math in French. And Genesee found that students that started French immersion in grade 7, okay, so about 12, versus students that started French immersion in grade 1, like about 5, 6, at the end of high school, they turned out to be at around the same level. So that's very interesting, right? We think that the earlier starters would be much better, but Genesee found that that's not the case. In a similar study in Spain, Munoz found that learners starting in L2, starting a foreign language at age 11, actually had a slight advantage over learners who started that foreign language at age 8. So as you can see, there are a lot of studies that actually show that early starters may not mean that they'll end up speaking the language any better. The second fallacy they introduce us to is very interesting. It's called the misattribution fallacy. And it talks about studies with brain imaging and studying the brain and how learners learn, children, young learners, and adults. This work has been done by Kim et al. And many others, and they've found that children process information in a different part of the brain than adults. These are some very interesting findings, but there are a few problems with them. Number one, we don't know if they just took sort of poor quality adult learners and they didn't take high quality adult learners, because maybe high quality adult learners process in the same area as children. We don't know. Also, we don't know if processing in one part of the brain is better than processing in another. We still have not gone deep enough into that. We do know that children or young learners process in L2 the information from a foreign language. They process it differently than adult learners, but we don't know if that processing is better or worse. The real issues with these studies, as I mentioned before, is we don't know the proficiency of the younger learners or the adult learners, so we can't really compare the brain images or brain studies if we don't know the language proficiency of the subjects in the study. And the third fallacy they discuss is this misemphasis fallacy, where when they do these studies, they really focus or they handpick poor quality learners or lower level learners, learners that don't learn as quickly, adult learners that don't learn as quickly. But there's not a focus on these high performers, these successful adult learners. For example, there's this one very, very famous woman named Julie who moved from an English-speaking country to an Arabic-speaking country, I think it was Egypt, at the age of 22 or something like that. She had never spoken Arabic, and she moved there, she married an Egyptian guy, and she learned Arabic naturalistically. So that means that she didn't go to school, she didn't learn it at school, she just learned it by speaking, by listening. And a lot of people would say that Julie's ability is native. Like they couldn't tell a difference between an Arabic person who's spoken Arabic since birth and Julie, which is incredible, right? It gives us a lot of hope as learners. There are these success stories, right? And they tested Julie, and they found in some small areas that she may differentiate from the Arabic population that has learned Arabic since birth. But most people would say, yeah, she's native. So this brings up the question of, what is native-like competency? It's really, really hard to judge who is native and who is not native, right? We all speak differently. We all make mistakes when we speak. We all have different accents. This isn't just about English. This could be about Italian, Spanish, German, Arabic, any language in the world. Some scholars have really, really tried to see if there are differences between native speakers who have spoken since birth, pretty much, and L2 learners, so foreign language learners, like Julie, who learned later in life. And some of these studies show that you can perform at a native-like level even if you learn later in life when it comes to grammar or syntax. But they found, Abrahamson and Hill-Tenstam, they found that in the phonological area, like phonetics and speaking, that may be the one area where it's very, very difficult to reach native-like competency, even after age 5 or age 7 or age 8. Some scholars are very, very harsh, and they say even after age 3, guys, you're not able to attain a native-like ability. I'm not of that belief, but there are some scholars that say that. There are some scholars that say after age 5 or 7, because that's when the facial structure really sets in place, the mouth, the teeth, everything, after age 5, 7. So after that, you're already so used to speaking your native language that you'll have a bit of an accent, or your phonetics will be a bit different. You'll make a vowel a little bit longer than a native speaker. Some other scholars say by puberty, because that's when your body really changes, right? So by puberty, around age 12, 13. Some people say by age 15. But as we saw earlier, right? I don't want you guys to get discouraged. A lot of people have learned languages later in life, and they've been very, very successful. And there are these fallacies out there that after a certain age, you cannot be even close to native-like. And that simply is not true. The research does not show that, and we've talked about that. We've talked about that here. And for teachers out there, right? Motivation is a key, especially with adults, right? So kids, they're just taking it in, right? And they have no choice, right? But adults, you have to be motivated. You have to be motivated when you're learning a language. And we found that motivation is a key factor, right? Julie and others, right? When you're motivated to learn a language and you put in the work, it is possible. We could talk all day about whether someone's native or not. Okay? We could talk all day about it. Scholars argue all the time. But that, for me, isn't the important thing. The important thing is there have been cases, and there are many, many success stories of people learning English later on in life. Yes, in general. So the studies show in general, children or young learners will learn, will end up at the end, right? At the end of their lives or later in life, they'll speak better than people who start a foreign language as an adult in general. But that does not mean that the critical period hypothesis is true, that it's impossible to attain native-like ability when you start as an adult. It just hasn't been proven. As we saw with Munoz's and Genesee's work, it may not be worth it, right? For school boards, this is for governments, it may not be worth it to invest so much money, so much money into programs when you don't have the proper teachers. You have poor input. Input's what you receive as a learner, right? When you have poor input and when you're not practicing repeatedly, we've seen that those programs, they don't work at all. So maybe school boards should invest later on, because we've seen that people starting at age 11 versus age 8, there's not much of a difference. You may even have a slight advantage in a foreign language. Maybe schools should start later on. I myself, here in Canada, I've seen that with French, where some students, they'll start later on, they'll start in grade 5 versus grade 1, or they'll start in grade 7 versus grade 1, and depending on the student, many students can surpass other students. So it's also an individual thing. And when I taught English in Italy, abroad, right? I taught English in Italy. I found that the Italian school system, right? They want them to learn Italian, French, Spanish, Greek, Latin, all at different ages. And if you're not having this repeated practice, scholars time and time again, they show that the quality of input has to be very good. You have to have repeated practice. If the school board doesn't allow quality speakers of a foreign language into the school board, for example, I saw that in Italy, it's very, very difficult for teachers, right? Teachers, because there are expats in Italy, there are people who speak English very, very well in Italy, but they can't teach in the public school board. And yes, they should have to go through some sort of progress in order to become a public school teacher. But maybe it shouldn't be as rigid as it is right now, because you need that quality input. Okay, you need quality teachers and you need repeated practice. So in my opinion, learning a bunch of different languages for a short amount of time, or with poor input, right, poor exposure to the language, there's not much point in that, and it's a waste of money. So I've seen that in Canada, I've seen that in Italy, right? We have to focus on quality input and quality teachers. Even if the students are young, even if they're 7, 8, or even 5 starting a foreign language, but they don't get the quality exposure they need, they're not going to learn the language. The studies time and time again have shown that they're not going to learn the language. So we need to invest our money properly as government, as a society, right? We need to invest our money properly in language learning, because language learning is very, very possible. And yes, the studies have shown that children in general receive the language better, but it's not impossible for you adults either. Okay, you can learn a foreign language. I want to be encouraging in this video, because a lot of times you hear, you're old, you won't be able to learn. It's just not true. Yes, you have to be motivated, but you can learn. We've learned with the misinterpretation fallacy, the misemphasis fallacy, and the misattribution fallacy, that yes, children may have an advantage, but we do not know. We cannot conclude that this critical period exists where after this amount of time you will not be able to be native-like. Okay, that's not true. I've seen it with my students. The studies show that that's not true. So be motivated, be happy, be willing to learn the language, and you will be successful. It doesn't matter what age you are. Thank you so much. God bless. Please consider subscribing to the channel. If you like this video, leave a comment. I'll be willing to do more sort of studies like this because it's fun for me and it might be interesting for you too. Thank you so much. Once again, God bless.